Hello, please feel very welcome to join this first webinar called Insights and Strategies for Thinking in English with Leona Wellington. Let me tell you that this event is sponsored by the regional site of MEP at Desamparados and their regional advisory office for English teaching. To develop this activity, we have a very special guest today. She's an expert in the language teaching, and she has joined us today. But let me introduce her to you before everything. She's Mrs. Leona Wellington. She's an author, educator, artist, and actor. She holds a bachelor's and a master's degree in TESL, a Cambridge International Diploma for Teachers and Trainers. She has taught ESL and EFL worldwide in North America, Costa Rica, Oman, and Kazakhstan. She aims to preserve the lingua franca for improved worldwide communication. She utilizes in her workshops engaging fun and personalized student-centered practice as opposed to explanations. She uses right brain techniques for acquisition versus learning. She focuses on personalization and motivation, the key to sustained learning of any kind. Her program is based on core principles student needs for a solid foundation in English. Recently, she has written a very interesting book called How to Think in English in 3 Vital Steps. And with no further information, I leave you with Mrs. Leona Wellington. Leona, go ahead and tell us, how did you come to create this valuable resource and material for English teachers in the whole world?
Thank you, Juan Carlos. Thank you very much. It's a very interesting story how I came to write this book, because originally my whole premise is about teaching English is to work on the verb families and to give the students a core foundation of the language. So I never really thought about this, except that I had an incident that happened when I was working at the University of Nizwa, where students would come in very often when they were ready to graduate to get help with their final year project. Well, I had a student came in and she was an English major and she was scheduled to graduate and then go out and teach English in the public schools. And when she brought me her final year project, I opened up the paper to help her out, and I started reading, and I couldn't understand anything that she had written. I said, oh my God, this lady is going to go out and teach English and I can't understand what she wrote. Now it did have, good vocabulary, and it seemed to be very well written with long sentences and everything else, but I could not understand what she was trying to say. So I looked at it a little more carefully, and suddenly it dawned on me that the reason I couldn't understand was because she was not thinking in English. In other words, she did not have the basic premises on which you plant the whole English language, like the soil, and that is thinking in English. And it actually, it's simple when you think about it. It's only in 3 vital steps. You have to have those vital steps, but if you don't take those vital steps and you don't put things in that order, then it's going to impede your ability to make yourself understood. And this was her problem. So I just told her, I'm sorry, you're going to have to go home and rewrite this paper and just think of 3 things. It's only 3 steps that you have to take. First of all, you have to decide who or what is doing the action. What is the person you have to name? So you have to locate the basic subject. And then after that, you have your verb phrase, which is another whole story in itself. And then after that, you have to put your object. So basically you have subject, verb, object. Now, that seems simple enough, and most students know that, but when they start writing, technical English and using a lot of vocabulary and so forth, sometimes they forget that because it may not be the same in their own native language. And so I thought, this is hopeless. I said, I don't know what we're going to do with this student. And I didn't think that I was going to see her again. But lo and behold, she came back in a couple of weeks and she had rewritten her paper, and I could understand her paper. So I said, oh my God, how important this is. And we don't stress it enough with our students. It's not we don't stress it enough, because we do tell our students that that's the order of English, but it just happens that English, that order, things have to be in their proper place. If they're not, you don't have anything that's understandable. So that's what prompted me, or got me interested in writing this book, so that we could function, that is, in those 3 steps, so that we have slot number 1, slot number 2, and slot number 3, and that's the way that we think in English. If you have those 3 slots in place, then you can fill in all of the other stuff and increase the sizes of each one, but that's the order that they have to come in, and that's the order that you have to stick with in English, because you can't vary that order in English. So that's what prompted me to write this book, which is like a beginning to a foundation of English.
Okay, great. I'm sure that all English teachers have thought this to themselves. I have thought it to myself many times. How do we think in English? And how, more than that, how do we make our students think in English? Well, to continue and go on with this conversation, which is very interesting, we have pre-established some questions for you, Leona. So I'm going to present to you the first question, and this one says, what made you write this book about the benefits for students when they reach the ability of thinking in English?
Okay, thank you for that. It's really not a matter of reaching the ability of thinking in English. This is where we have to turn things upside down. It's really starting with thinking in English. We have to start from that premises. And then the only thing the teacher has to do is make sure that the students stay within those boundaries in those 3 steps. Because if they do, and then everything else that they teach is going to always fall on that same groundwork. It's like a backdrop. So that's really the thing. It's a start. It's not what we have to reach. We have to reach other levels of English, but this is the start that we can never forget.
Okay, thank you for that amazing answer. With that, I'm understanding that it's not something that we have to reach. It's something that is already there. It's just a matter of teaching it from the very beginning in the right way. So the students develop this position and they start from the very first moment thinking in the target language. Well, that is very clear. Thank you, Leona. Next question, number 2 says, after teaching the error in the order of words, is it possible to go back and fix it? How does it relate to fossilization?
Well, fossilization is a very, very interesting phenomena that happens worldwide. And the bad news is that, according to experts, it's not possible to fix fossilization. In other words, once a student fossilizes and makes repetitive errors, they will continue making those repetitive errors. Now, the good news is that I do not believe that it's impossible to cure fossilization. If you have the right order as a premises, and then you continue with working on each aspect, which would be working on the aspect of the subject, the aspect of the verb phrase, and the aspect of the object, or the completion of any given sentence, no matter how complicated or how simple it is, then as long as you have that and you reinforce that all the way, then you're able to get the students not only to think in English, but to have a correct foundation. And this is really vital, because it's better for the students to get this during the foundation period, not afterwards when they are already fossilized, because fossilization is something more that can be prevented than cured, even though I really believe that with right brain technology, with certain forms of indirect repetition, there's a lot of techniques that we can use, and I really am very hopeful that we will be able to unfossilize students that are already fossilized, because they did not practice, have a good foundation to begin with. Because if you practice an error during your foundation period and you repeat the error over and over, then you learn that and you think that's the correct way to say things. So it takes some undoing to go back and to correct the fossilization. So of course, I think it's possible with these technologies that I mentioned, it would be possible to correct a fossilized thinking.
Wonderful. How motivating is to hear these facts about fossilization, because it's very often that we hear teachers talking about this matter, and also students who started the process many years ago and they dropped it, thinking that they could not go on studying the language or improving because they consider themselves already fossilized. So it's a lot of motivation to receive these facts and to know that there's something we can do, and there's something they can do to go on and continue in a great experience towards speaking and thinking in English. Um, the next question that we have is, how does your book guide teachers to help students think in English? What are some contextualized examples?
Okay, I think for that, what I would say is that basically these concepts, like the thinking in English concept with three basic components that have a particular order, and the core structure of English, which would be like the verb phrases and so forth, that when you lay all of these out, you can't just tell the students this is the way it is. When they're doing their daily practice, you as a teacher have to have in mind that you're working under a core structure and you're developing a core structure along with all the universal language skills. Because the idea is that the students, to be proficient in the language, will have to use the universal skills, which are basically, you have, affirmative sentences, that is descriptive text or descriptive narrative where people are describing things and talking about things that happen. And then you have the negative ones. They're saying, well, no, that doesn't happen that way. It happens a different way. So you have affirmative sentences, you have negative sentences, and most of all, and this one is really important, and I think it's very important for teachers to include a lot of the inversion process that we use to ask questions. Because I found worldwide that where students fail the most is in asking questions correctly. And so this has to be practiced very well in a repetitive way so that students are constantly practicing the skill of asking and answering questions, because those are universal skills. You can't communicate with anybody unless you can ask and answer questions. So you have your affirmative and negative statements, you have your questions, you have the answers to the question, and then you have certain phrases that are like exclamations and so forth. And with that, you pretty much cover the universal language skills, which is our goal. When you think about it, our goal is for students to be able to use all the language skills that they need to communicate with anybody in the world through the lingua franca.
Well, how important is it to take this into consideration when we are planning, when we are preparing our lessons, and when we are organizing the way we teach structure to students? Sometimes we follow books or practices that we have recycled from other processes of a study, and it's very important to take into account that we need to focus and emphasize on a structure, but not from a grammar point of view, from a usage point of view. Well, thank you for that interesting answer. And the next question says, pronunciation and accent. What's the role of those aspects in developing the ability for thinking in English?
Okay, as far as pronunciation and accent, it's true that this could be an issue, especially for people to understand you when you're speaking. So that can be an issue, but we certainly can help a lot with that issue, and that is that there are most of the pronunciation problems have to do with the vowels, because we only have 5 vowels in English, but you also have only 5 vowels in Spanish. Yet in Spanish, you only have 5 sounds that go with those vowels, where in English, the vowels and a combination of vowels make up to 20 different sounds. So if the students don't get the sounds correctly, they're going to make mistakes that it's going to make communication not possible, because they're going to say things that are not correct because they've changed the vowel sounds on the words. For example, like the word soap and soup. If they don't pronounce those correctly, they're saying two completely different things. So my tip for this is, once, to practice all the different vowel sounds, and once the student really gets what that sound should sound like, then make a whole list of rhyming words that have the same sound, even though the spelling is often different. So it doesn't have to do with the spelling, it has to do with that particular sound. So if you have rhyming words and the student practices with all the rhyming words, then that's one way of using the repetition, that is the repetitive sound, so that they will repeat it many times, and then that sound will come out correctly for the student rather than incorrectly. So you have those sounds that are very important, and it has to do with the vowels, because most of the consonants are similar in at least between Spanish and English. The consonants usually are pretty stable, but the vowel sounds are the ones that really make the difference, and that's only in that area. Other than that, it does not affect whatsoever. The core components of the language and the foundation are not affected by the pronunciation. The only thing that the pronunciation affects is the other person being able to understand what you're saying. So if you don't get those sounds right, then you need to work on the sounds. Sometimes there's also a certain rhythm in English that's a little bit different, but a little practice and a little theater play, dialogue play, will correct that easily. So those are the things the teacher has to look out for, is understanding and communication on top of solid structure, on top of word order.
Well, and it makes me really happy to hear this information. And also, you just made me think and remind all those students who have received a negative feedback at some point and from some teachers, and that they just don't want to keep on studying English because they consider that since they do not have an appropriate pronunciation and a good accent, and they are not going to succeed. So this is really motivated again, because with this, and I hope that people that are watching this video reconsider if they have experienced some kind of frustration on the way to learning English, that they reconsider and they take into account that pronunciation and accent, they are going to be enhanced through the learning, and they are not going to affect communication if we do things the right way. And to finish, we have a closing question that says, which are your top 5 recommendations for language teachers towards active thinking in the target language?
Well, I think that my recommendations are a bit like a pyramid. Start with the word order, that's on the bottom. Then and then number 2 would be your verb families that that appear in everything that you can say in English, because this way the students, whether they're in kindergarten or they're in university, like my student was in Oman, it doesn't matter how technical the language is, how good the vocabulary is, how long the sentences are. If they stay on that essential word order and they manage all the tools for the verb phrases, these things will appear in everything that they say, doesn't matter the level. So they need to stick with that foundation and then start increasing. After that, once they have the foundation done solidly and down pat, then they can just continue, and from then it's more a building of vocabulary. After that, slowly you build vocabulary, because the vocabulary that they acquire after that is still going to be based on the same structure. So you build vocabulary, you be sure that you get all the idiomatic sayings and phrasal verbs and things that might be confusing for students. But even if they're a little bit confusing, once they master that, the good thing is that all of it is going to go right back to the basics. It still goes back to the foundation. So I think that practicing the next one would be practicing all of the skills, and that is because most of the students that we have are not, just beginning like primary. They already have reading and writing in their own language. They've already acquired that. What we have to make sure is that they use all of the skills, because students learn from different points of view. Some students learn better by hearing. Some students can speak clearly and pronounce easily, and some students kind of understand grammatical structures better. So reading is one of the most important ones, because reading is an indirect way of teaching syntax and structure. But they need to practice all of them. They need to have some speaking, especially speaking, because students are shy. And so if students don't get enough speaking, then what's going to happen is that they're going to graduate, they're going to understand the grammar, they're going to understand the rules, but when they have to produce, they can't produce. So it's really important to have a lot of dialogue. And like I said, question asking is vital. And I hope we could have another webinar just about asking questions. That is so important, and it's failing worldwide in my experience, with advanced students who still cannot ask a question correctly in English. So I think that is about it, covering the universal skills and doing it with all of the ways, that is listening, speaking, reading, and writing, a little bit of all, so that all students can be involved in one way or the other.
Thank you very much, Leona, for sharing your expertise with us today. Is there any final comment that you want to give our English teachers in Costa Rica?
Well, I think that I've covered everything. In this particular book, this book is a little bit of offshoot because of the experience that I had, but it only made me realize the importance of the word order, because later on that word order will be continued. Even in the book, I have a lot of exercises for building a noun phrase, because even the adjectives, you have an adjective, and it's only an adjective because it comes before the noun. Before that, you start the noun phrase with a determiner. The determiners, you're going to talk about a noun, and then you build up, and you can use even a verb can become an adjective simply because it comes before the noun of your sentence. So again, even in that sense, the order is really important. In English, everything has a place, and everything must be put in its place. It's very simple. If you keep things in order, then everything else is really simple. It really, I've taught Spanish before as well, and really, English is very simple when you really stick to those basics and to the word order. So I hope that you'll contact me. I hope that this will be helpful for you as a basis. And the next step after that is going to be tackling the verb phrases, because that's where we really will get our foundation down with the verb phrases.
Thanks for your participation, Leona. Let's hope to meet again very soon with educational purposes. Okay, and if you want to know more about Leona's material and her book, How to Think in English in 3 Vital Steps, there on the screen you have Leona's contact, her link to her webpage, and also the link to Amazon, where you can find her book. And I'm sure that you're going to find a lot of valuable information there. As you could see, also we have Leona Wellington's YouTube channel. You can find her there also. There you can have access to very interesting videos, always related to ESL and EFL training. And if you want to know more about all the interesting experience that Leona is always willing to share with the English teachers, not only in Costa Rica, but all around the world. Some of the slides used in this presentation were designed using bricks. That was intentional. Using bricks, it's a way to represent the way we study, learn, and practice English, put in one piece upon the other, and creating this process of layers in which we can have access to an active thinking of the language. Um, Thanks for attending this event. Thanks for your interest and willingness towards English teaching and providing always quality education services. Blessings and have a great day.